Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are very well. Again, it's been a heck of a week. The parliaments might be closed, they might all be on holiday, shooting grouse in Scottish moors, but it kicks on and we've got a big show in line for you today. And to do that, let's get them in right away, because as you know, at the end, I'm always going to say the clock's beating us, so let's not waste time, let's get right to it. Over there in Edinburgh, we've got Lloyd Quinnan, of course. Oh, pound already? Wow. Great stuff. We're pound up and we've just started. How are you?
I'm okay. What a week.
Good man, indeed. And over there in Brussels, it's the Coatbridge Cavalier himself, Mr. Boswell. How are you?
Very good. Good day, everybody. Hope everybody's doing all right.
Yeah, we are. I'm sure we do. Lots to talk about. And of course, our favourite lawyer, it's our Eva up there in Click Manager. How are you, Eva?
Hi, Roddy. Well, in common with everybody else in Scotland, I think this week I am extremely angry as well as disappointed.
Yeah, stunned and shocked. And to add to our joys and in discussions today, we're joined by the stalwart of the SNP party, Steve Norris, and my neighbour's dog at the same time. Steve, welcome.
Hi, Roddy.
Coubry.
I'm actually big time now. Going to get weather's great, so plenty to say about a very difficult week for many people. I've got to say that.
Indeed, and I'm already apologising for the dog barking, and I've got some neighbours across the way with 4 children who are the noisiest children on the earth. So I apologise. Please don't put it in the comments. I know the dog's annoying. I know people shouting in the background's annoying. I can't do anything about it. I don't even have my gun with me these days. But anyway, let's kick off right away, because it has been a heck of a week. Lloyd, as you said, I in the accompanying article to this podcast, I've written about a blog I wrote some time ago about the downing of the Berlin Wall and how it was a lot of acts. It wasn't just 2 guys sitting in a pub on a Friday night in East Berlin that decided to pull it down. There was all sorts of things. A Polish Pope, Gorbachev, the strikes in Gdansk, all sorts of things, the weakening of the Soviet Union. So it seems to me with the SNP, so many things going wrong. I have never known, and I'm glad I've got 3 SNP people here to explain to me how they can do so much self-harm. And they did it again this week, because, stick it up, Techie, Angus Robertson, MSP, Cabinet Secretary, has a meeting with someone from the Israeli government. The Israeli government, who have been deemed by the ICC, the ICJ and the UN as to be committing war crimes, apartheid, and slaughtering innocent women and children. Apart from anything else, the optics on it are not good, but it was the wrong thing to do, surely, Lloyd.
There was no question about it. It was absolutely the wrong thing to do. But it's an interesting kind of pattern here. Angus Robertson would know clearly that at some point, if you get your picture taken with the Israelis, then at some point that picture will be used, either as for publicity or for blackmail, one of the two. And then when you're dealing with the Israelis, sometimes blackmail and publicity are actually the same thing. I find it quite extraordinary that here we are again in a situation where senior members of the Scottish National Party believe that they can make foreign policy on behalf of our country and on behalf of our people, and actually make foreign policy that's flying directly in the face of what the people of the country actually want. I mean, to me, it was either extraordinarily naive or it was another part of the managed decline of the SNP, of which Angus Robertson is a very firm part. You know, it's interesting over the past few years with the changes and the focuses on policy, the shift away from the campaign for independence. It's like you're salami slicing the membership of the Scottish National Party. And that this would appear to be another part of that salami slicing exercise. I mean, I really can't express how disgusted I was when I saw the photographs. But to be honest with you, knowing full well the politics of the Culture and External Affairs Minister, I'm not in the least surprised. Not in the least surprised. I feel very sorry for a lot of those people who've been in the party, the SNP, for a long time, who have been through thick and thin, and then switch the televisions on and see what they would consider a senior member of the party cuddling up to those who would commit genocide. It's hard to talk about it, Roddy. It's actually very hard to talk about it because it makes you so angry. It's very, very difficult not to use language which would be inappropriate on a Sunday morning.
You're on mute, Roddy.
Oh, myself a quid. I do it. Dog was barking. As Lloyd has alluded to, Phil, Angus Robertson is the Culture and Constitutional Secretary. Now, the SNP have a policy of supporting Palestine, the state of Palestine, and opposing the actions of illegal settlements and the war. Yet here is a member of the cabinet who's, currying and, kowtowing with the Israeli deputy ambassador. Now, that then says he's speaking for the government. Now, they've changed their policy on so many other things. Is this signalling a change of policy? Because he's still in his job. I mean, this is Sunday morning and we're recording this show, and as of 10 o'clock this morning, he hadn't been fired. Why, I don't know. We'll come on to that in a minute. But he shouldn't be doing that, and he's going against party policy.
Yeah, the problem is, of course, Angus was instrumental in the deconstruction of the proper due process under the SNP when he removed the ability of the people to determine what our policy would be at conference and what we could vote on and what we can't. They just do what they want. This is part of the deconstruction of the independence movement, as Lloyd quite rightly states. Now, is there a time for dialogue? Always. There's always a time for dialogue. But he's not in the position to negotiate anything. He's not a significant player, never will be, and to have got a conversation with a government that even the institutions, even the big institutions, can no longer keep their head in the sand and have to stand up and say that this is wrong, that this is genocidal, these are war crimes. When the major institutions are recognizing this, and you are parlaying and not criticizing something as fundamental as that, then and you're talking about shared values that go against the will of the people he purports to represent, i.e. us. Again, Angus and his ilk feel they can speak and act on our behalf on an issue that the people of Scotland are clear upon. Perhaps, I think the people are as vociferous as the Irish, but I think the Irish are heard because their government actually speak the will of the people, reflect the will of the people, whereas our government, the Scottish, let's face it, they're a council, the big council, no longer speak for us. They're not talking about independence, and they're become a miniature of Labour and Tory. That is the road to insignificance. You will, as the salami slicing analogy very accurately predicts, you'll eventually run out of sausage, and the game is over as far as I'm concerned for these people. They should know they're hanging on for dear life. They're hanging on for the money, and they should have no future. They should have no future in a Scotland that speaks up for justice, against oppression, and certainly he should not be sitting down and not criticising someone who is representing a government that's practising genocide. It's a disgrace.
Steve, I mean, you're an activist down there in Kirkcudbright. As I say, I wish you came from Dumfries. It's easier to say. But how do you take when you saw this with Angus Robertson? We'll stick with Angus Robertson just now. We'll come on to Mr. Mason in a minute. Were you shocked, upset?
Words. I felt a mixture of emotions, Roddy. A mixture of sadness, fury was maybe the biggest one. Bewilderment was in the mix also. I've got a personal stake in this because of most weeks, or on several occasions I've attended, there's weekly vigils held in the High Street in Dumfries to support Palestine. And the speakers address a range of topics ranging from, the ongoing genocide of the people to garnering international support. 1 week they listed some of the names of some of the kids that have been butchered by the IDF in their attacks in Gaza and in the occupied West Bank. And I was invited 1 week to talk about the death and the killings of journalists in the West Bank and in the occupied West Bank and Gaza. And I spoke on the matter as to how it was unconscionable how a state can deliberately target and eliminate journalists and their families in an attempt to suffocate the truth about what's going on in Gaza. So, for a range of reasons, when Angus Robertson appeared on the television screens, photographed with the Israeli deputy ambassador, I was absolutely dumbstruck by what had happened. And it cut me deeply. It cut a lot of people deeply, because it's as if the very essence of what Scotland stands for had been compromised by this individual. And for me, it's absolutely unforgivable how this could happen. I remember, some of you will remember this, a way back, as an example, I'll give you an example, a way back in, I think it was a conference, I don't know where it was, but Willie McIlvanney gave a speech conference, and he wrote a paper called Stand Scotland Where It Did. And I think in the late 80s, maybe 88, maybe. That's gone back a long way. But in that speech, I remember this vividly. He was in the streets of Paris with a friend in a cafe in the Champs-Elysees, it was. And the guy, his French friend, asked him, "What is it about Willie and Scotland, this continual sense of justice?" And he was right. That's what underpins Scottish society. So what Angus Robertson did undercuts and destroys everything that Scotland should stand for internationally, and it's absolutely unforgivable.
I absolutely agree. In fact, last week I suggested that John Swinney, when all the British and the French and the Lithuanians and the Americans said they wouldn't go to the Nagasaki Remembrance because Israel's invitation had been withdrawn, I said, John Swinney should go. He should get in touch with the Japanese and say, "I'll go." And we all agreed, and I thought, yeah, damn good idea. Instead, John Swinney backs up Angus Robertson, Eva, to have a meeting with the Deputy Ambassador of Israel, and says it was approved. So I want to understand if the policy of the party is they oppose what's happening to the Palestinians, that they support the Palestinian state, why is John Swinney and Angus Robertson having a meeting with the deputy, or not having a meeting, but allowing Robertson to have a meeting, condoning it? Why is that happening?
Angus Robertson's one of these people that you wonder why he's in the job that he's in. And sometimes you have to look to see what people don't do to give some understanding and some ability to assess why it is they do what you know they do. And in this instance, Angus Robertson, who is not renowned for being backwards at coming forwards in the context of self-publicity, nor indeed are those around him, it was not he who tweeted that photo of himself with the Israelis. It was tweeted by the Israelis. Now, if Angus Robertson was doing a job with the representatives of Israel where he was actually arguing for diplomacy and for peace talks, and if he was remonstrating with the Israelis about their conduct towards the Palestinians, then he'd have been the first to say so. But he wasn't. He waited for other people to release the photo, at which point John Swinney jumped in with both feet to defend him and to provide a certain narrative, which we know is false, Because if the narrative was that that meeting was designed primarily to record the distress and the displeasure and the serious fears and concerns that there are for what's going on in that part of the world, then we would have known about it. It would have been shouted from the rooftops. As it is, you only have to look at Angus Robertson's CV and see all the times that he's hit the headlines for the wrong reasons to understand that this man is in the wrong job if the purpose of the Scottish Government and the SNP is to attain independence for our country. Because his job title at the moment is Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture. Now, this is the man that most folk heard about during the expenses scandal some years ago when he was an MP at Westminster and he had to repay some money. The next time most folk heard about him was when he was the leader of the SNP at Westminster, when he achieved the sum total of 0 as regards taking us any closer to that goal of independence. He lost his seat and was manoeuvred into the Scottish Parliament after standing for an Edinburgh constituency, having previously always been an MP in the north of Scotland. So you have to wonder where his loyalties lie. Who do they lie with? Because it doesn't seem to me that his loyalties actually lie with the people who expected him to continue the fight for independence. The independence word hasn't passed his lips for several years. He has not propounded a strategy for independence. He has not outlined how we attain independence. He has said nothing about where the fight for independence lies after the result of the general election. Instead, he's quietly in the background gone about his business of representing the interests of Britain. He is not representing the interests of his party, because his party at Westminster particularly have actually done a fair amount of very good work in relation to seeking peace and standing up for the people, particularly of Gaza. So I find it interesting this week that I was agreeing with Brendan O'Hara and his press release in respect of how very, very poorly behaved Angus Robertson had been in the context of this meeting. So Angus Robertson is one of these folk that you have to ask yourself, as I said at the start, why is he in that job? What is he actually doing? What is he supposed to do? And what do you think he's doing? Because we elected a Scottish government to run a devolved assembly. Unfortunately for us, as Phil said, it's a glorified town council. So we thought we were electing people that would deal with education, for example, or housing, or transport, or the drugs war, or the NHS. And all of these things are in crisis at the moment, and our attention is diverted away onto this clown who has made a fool of our parliament, of our country, of his party, and of what is an absolutely disgraceful, horrific set of circumstances in the Middle East for the sake of his own private, personal agenda, which is not the agenda of the people of this country in the main. We want a peaceful solution. We don't want to see a cabinet minister meeting with and apparently legitimising the conduct of a state at the moment which is a warmonger and many would say is guilty of genocide and slaughter. Call it what you will, but it's very, very wrong.
Yeah, well, I'm one of the many that calls it a genocide and a slaughter. You say he's in the wrong job. I think he's in the wrong party. I think he should probably be in the Conservative and Unionist Party. That's where he belongs. I mean, he hasn't given us a 10-point plan. At least Mike Russell, your favourite guy, Lloyd, he gives a 10-point plan. Angus has given us nothing. But, you know, Angus is bad and he shouldn't have done this. It was ridiculous and he should be fired. If you're listening, Mr. Swinney, I know you might not be, but you'll have one of your plebs listening. Sack him. It's the only chance. He's got to be fired. His position is untenable. He has to go. But it was nothing in comparison to John Mason. Now, we always thought John was a wee bit eccentric, I think is the fairest way I can put it. However, he excelled himself. Techie, stick up Mr. Mason. Firstly, there he is with the Israeli ambassador. I don't know who the other woman is, but that's John, big grin in his chops. But he went on to say, stick up his nicks, but where it wasn't really when he was interacting with Sandra, wonderful woman, Sandra White. it wasn't really a genocide. You'd have to kill 10 times as many. He's not happy with 40,000 civilians being killed, Lloyd. He wanted 400,000 before you can even call it a genocide. Is the man mental?
Yes. I've known John Mason for a very long time. People might be surprised to know, but apart from John Swinney, the longest serving elected member of the Scottish National Party is John Mason. John became a councillor in Glasgow in the late 80s and has been elected, apart from a brief period, has been elected ever since, either as a councillor, a member of Parliament, or a member of the Scottish Parliament, which is extraordinary in itself. John has managed to fly under the radar with his strange 17th century beliefs. You know, I always used to be amused when they referred to Jacob Rees-Mogg as the member for the 17th century. Well, we can beat that. We've got John Mason. He's the member for the 16th century. John has always been happy in the company of the Israelis and very happy in the company of British Israelites. John is an evangelical fundamental Christian of a particular hue, and that is the hue that believes in Armageddon and believes in the rapture. He shares this in common with some of the most extreme members of Netanyahu's cabinet, including Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. In John's mind, what he said was, there are still people alive, therefore it is not a genocide. That's the way John Mason's mind works, and it's very strange. What I would like to point out, though, is that, Roddy, you asked when the picture was up who the other woman in the picture is with John Mason and the Deputy Ambassador. That's the woman who runs the Scotland desk at the Israeli embassy. It's on her biog. There is a desk in the Israeli embassy dedicated, a desk and a unit dedicated to dealing with Scotland. That's how important we are to the Israelis. But then again, I've talked about this before. The Israelis do everything in a preemptive manner. It is not in Israel's interest of Scotland to become an independent country, because that would both weaken the United Kingdom and it would mean a new vote in the United Nations. And currently, in fact, the Israelis have known for 30 odd years that the general feeling here in our country would be pro-Palestinian and anti-Zionist. So they don't want an independent Scotland. They have no interest in an independent Scotland that could vote against Israel in the United Nations. The tragedy here is, by Angus Robertson and John Swinney's playing at foreign policy, they drag our country through the mud. The fact of the matter is that John Mason and John Swinney, through their strange beliefs, would have us as a country align ourselves entirely with the United States, Israel, and NATO. In fact, that was one of Angus Robertson's great achievements in the SNP, was forcing us from a position of neutrality to a position of supporting NATO. A terrible, despicable man. What's tragic in this particular circumstances, that John Mason's religion informs his politics. That's why he says the things that he does. And the one thing that we really need to get back to in politics is, you can have as much faith in any religion you wish, but immediately you become an elected politician, you have to put that in the back pocket. It is not something that you should be deploying on a daily basis. And John Mason is effectively telling us that he and those who share his ideology wish for Armageddon to come. And by hanging about with the Israelis, then effectively what you're doing is saying, yes, let that happen. But Roddy, I'm so furious, I'm so saddened, I'm so sickened. I actually find it difficult to properly string an argument together here. So I think you move on.
Done very well, actually. I mean, you talk about, Israel is their entire government is because it is a religious government. as is Saudi, and that's, you know, two of the places you do not want to go for your holidays, folks. But here's the thing, Phil, when most cabinet ministers get sacked for an indiscretion or something that goes wrong, or an MP gets fired for being caught in flagrato or whatever, they usually do the old, well, I want to apologise to my constituents, to my family, to the wider public. John Mason went out and repeated again the same thing that got him fired. He said again that he didn't think it was a genocide. They'd have to kill 400,000 to make it, you know, in his opinion, a genocide. Absolutely no remorse. He should now be expelled, never mind suspended. He should be expelled, deselected, and not been allowed into public life again.
Yeah, I would go for deselection here 100%, and he should no longer represent the people of Scotland, because he doesn't. He does not. That is fearsome. The rapture, that whole concept in Christian belief is radical. It's so radical. We should be afraid of it. People who believe that actually do wish for nuclear war. They do wish the end of humanity so they can be judged, and they think they can get into heaven and everybody else will go to hell. That's the kind of human, if you can call it human, belief that he holds. Absolute appalling way to think, and to have that conviction. Now, I agree, you can believe what you want, but you're 100% right, Roddy. When you take on a public role, you're elected, you represent the people, and you take on the will of the people, and you reflect the will of the people. This guy has no place in politics speaking like this. He's got no place, unless he wants to go and openly state what he believes. Then he can join Nicola and Humza and Angus Robertson and openly say, I don't want independence. I'm working for the man. I will do what I can to keep myself on the gravy train. And then at least he'd be telling the truth. Now, this guy is an absolute disgrace, and the double standards are horrific. When you think about it, the SNP, this was back in November 23 when the SNP did, I think it was the King's Speech, and there was about 100, I can't remember, it was about 56 Labour MPs. 56 Labour MPs actually voted for the SNP's amendment to the King's Speech for calling for an immediate ceasefire. Now that shows the division within the Labour Party. But when you have a party whose raison d'etre is to be independent and speak for the people of Scotland, and you not only deny independence and don't work towards it, but you reflect beliefs that are completely contrary to the will of the people, you have no place. You have no place in Scottish politics. You do not represent the people. And yeah, you're right. Deselected is a start. Thrown out the party. And to be honest, I'd just go for a by-election, get rid of them. And SNP will lose it, but they won't, because they'll lose even more ground. They're in a hell of a mess, and the bloodletting that they will oversee will keep these warmongering jockeys and believers in the rapture in power, while the few that are decent left are cut. That's what's going to happen. They'll be the last. They'll be the last ones standing. I'm sorry to say, these people in particular need to be removed from the SNP. That clear out we talked about, so we can return to principles that we hold dear and that reflect the will of the people of Scotland. There is no other way. There is no other way. Angus, that list, we'll do that list again of who has to go, and they all have to go.
Well, most of them, 99% of them. Kecky, stick up, John. Not only, Steve, did he reiterate that he didn't think it was a genocide, we need to kill more Palestinians, he went on to say, can you put that one up? There you go. The IRA slaughtered innocent lives, did they not? A peace came to Northern Ireland because the UK government negotiated with the IRA. To term the IRA as bad as the IDF, yeah, you know, it is just incredible. How does a mindset like that come together, Steve?
Well, it's not my strongest point. Ecclesiastical matters, I've got to say that. what strikes me, though, about John Mason and people like him is, you know, the teachings of Christ include sayings such as, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." And after seeing what's been happening in Gaza, you know, the horrific scenes being broadcast from on a daily, hourly basis, sometimes, of children getting murdered by the IDF through bombs, through white phosphorus, through gunfire, through snipers, tens of thousands of young lives snuffed out. I cannot fathom how a so-called Christian man can come out with stuff like this when the very person to whom they owe allegiance, that's Christ himself, would have been horrified and saddened and distraught about what is going on in Palestine. It's a dichotomy which I can't just get my head round. By way of an anecdote, I'm going to tell you something. John Mason is an evangelical Christian. Lloyd's absolutely right in that. And I've met evangelical Christians before, and they have got this blind spot towards humanity. I was in Wigton. I was a butcher in a former life. Used to cut up coos for a living. And we had a visit from, Wigton was blessed with a mission from Alabama of, white Baptist Christians, evangelical Christians. And they came into the back shop where folk were slaving away, making sausages and so on. And they looked askance at this team of beautifully dressed young men come in with the white, the dark suits and the white shirts and the ties, perfectly groomed, and began to lecture us about, I just said to them, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "Oh, we're here to bring Christianity to Wigtown and spread the good word of God." I said, "Oh, really?" So then they went on to wax lyrical about their work and so on, and evangelical work. And I began to ask them, I said, out of the blue, I said, "All right, you profess the word of God and the love of Christ and so on. Do you know what's going on in Nicaragua just now? Your government's bombing ports. It's slaughtering priests. It's killing communities through funding guerrillas, right-wing guerrillas who are trying to subvert democracy. And you're effectively trying to destroy a democratic government." And they hadn't a clue what I was talking about. This is the kind of level, the scale of how ill-informed these people are about humanity and about society at large. And I would suppose I would put John Mason in that bracket. How he can't square what he says about the importance of his faith and what he stands for with the actual reality on the ground, which is that tens of thousands of kids are being butchered in Gaza and in Palestine. And that's what I can't get my head around with people like John Mason.
Well, the people that you talk about, that's a very good analogy and whatnot. But the United States of America, God bless America, they call themselves the greatest Christian country in the world. They're all devout Christians. But they're supplying the bombs that are killing the children. They're supplying the bombs that are killing people in the people in Ukraine and in Russia. They're the ones that are doing it in wherever the world is. These God bless American Christians are killing people everywhere. So it's the same everywhere. Eva, when you saw John Mason and heard his outbursts and his lack of remorse after he got the whip removed, you wouldn't be surprised, I suppose, but were you disgusted?
Well, tell you what, Roddy, as a wee aside, what Steve's just brought to mind is that quotation from Desmond Tutu. When the missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible and we had the land, and they said, "Let us pray." We closed our eyes. When we opened them, we had the Bible and they had the land. There's a lesson in there for all of those who would try to preach. I was disgusted, as was everybody else, every right-minded person reading what John Mason had written. And then, of course, bearing in mind the sheer arrogance on the face of Angus Robertson in the first photo and the joy, the delight on the face of John Mason in the second one, I did wonder whether Mason had a phone call from somebody near to Swinney or near to the heart of the British establishment telling him, take the heat off Angus Robertson, because at the moment people are firing at him because he's the cabinet secretary. You put out a stupid tweet and we'll aim at you. We'll divert attention from Robertson onto you, John. We'll make you the scapegoat. You'll have to eat humble pie for a while. Job done, because everybody will forget about Angus Robertson and will not need to bother visiting any sanctions on him. So see if Scotland was actually the peace-loving, democratic, nice, couthy place that we want it to be, John Mason would be out in his ear. There would be a by-election in Shettleston and his name would not be on the ballot at that by-election. The SNP would be absolutely annihilated unless they had a person of principle standing for them for a change. It would make a nice change, quite honestly. And beyond that, Angus Robertson would not be in the cabinet. He would be forced to apologise. He would be forced to retract his comments, and he would be forced to explain to the people of this country exactly what it is that he's been doing in all the years that he's creamed hundreds of thousands of pounds out of us for delivering absolutely nothing positive for the people of Scotland. So John Mason is a scapegoat. That's all he is. He'll bounce back in the fullness of time, because these people do, whilst they've got the backing of some very important people. You know, the one person we've not mentioned today, and we wonder the extent of her involvement in this, is, of course, Nicola Sturgeon. Is she watching from the sidelines, or is she assisting in the pulling of the strings of the puppets?
Good question, Eva. One does wonder. But it really is a concern. Israel's tentacles have reached Scotland. You know, it's maybe happened for quite some time that we just weren't aware of it. This seems to have exacerbated it all. But we know that they've got their tentacles in to things south of the border, and certainly in the United States with AIPAC. But it was highlighted this week, Techie, can you stick it up, that 50% of Starmer's cabinet, Lloyd, are receiving funding from Tel Aviv. And it's just wrong. Now, my opinion is that money should be returned. There should be some sort of law in. I mean, if you can't donate from overseas into an election campaign, why are foreign governments allowed to fund cabinet ministers of the British government?
It's an absurd situation where, you know, a small political party or an individual doesn't have the ability to raise money from abroad. I mean, that you know, if we're honest about that particular piece of legislation, that really evolved out of an attempt to control the amount of money that would go to the nationalist parties in Wales and Scotland, and obviously very specifically aimed at controlling the finances of Sinn Féin in the occupied 6 counties. But it's the manner in which it happens. It's to provide staff. Primarily, that's what the money's used for. So you get lots of staff who know that the money's coming from Israel. That gives them a kind of pro-Israeli kind of feeling, and you build. The Israelis are clever. They're very, very clever. That's why they've been able to survive for the length of time, the occupation of someone else's country, and apparently the occupying of certain elements of the governments of most of the countries of the world. But getting back to us here in Scotland, in some ways, this opens up a very, very important argument, a very important debate for us, because why is it that we are important to Israel? You know, let's start looking at this from the other end of the telescope, which I've said on a number of occasions before. We have a very, very important, and I mean by that Scotland, the country, the geographical country, the people, the country. We have a position that is absolutely vital strategically to NATO, the United States, the United Kingdom, and by default, Israel. Because Israel operates on the basis of preemptive strike in everything, and that includes in politics, which is why it spends so much of the money that America gives it to buy American politicians through AIPAC, in exactly the same way as through the Jewish National Fund, in exactly the same way as through Labour Friends of Israel or the Conservative Friends of Israel or the Building Bridges with Israel organisation that's in the Scottish Parliament. All of this is international diplomacy. It's dark art international diplomacy. But you only apply that when you've something to gain from it. And we need to learn. Scotland has an important place in the world, both militarily, strategically, in terms of our natural resources, and in terms of our energy production. These are the things that people go to war for. That is why the Israelis want a finger in our pie, or a finger in Angus Robertson, or a finger in John Mason. You know, this goes back. Steve Norris will know this as well. One of the great patriots of the Scottish National Party during the 60s, well, 50s, 60s, 70s, until his untimely death in the 80s, was one Willie McRae, a lawyer who also had assisted the Israeli underground at the end of the Second World War, when he was a British officer serving in Palestine. He had assisted the Israeli underground and maintained a relationship with them over a long period of time. In fact, when Willie died, because he was considered to be a noble goyim, 1,000 trees were planted in Willie's name in Israel. And a great friend of the current leader of the Scottish National Party, John Swinney. In fact, there's a marvellous picture of a conference in Perth where you see Willie and John standing together. You know, Israel's had an interest in the Scottish National Party and Scottish politics for a very, very long time. We have to understand that when big countries or bad countries from elsewhere pay attention to your politics, then it's because you've got something that they want. And if we've got something that they want, does that not give the lie to the fact that we're too wee, we're too stupid, we're too poor to be an independent country?
I sometimes think we're too stupid. But a couple of things there. When you did mention that, you know, that they've got a finger in Robertson, that terrible picture came into my mind, and I don't want to look at that again. It was horrible. But what Lloyd was saying there, Phil, about the Israeli government funding staff for the Starmer government or British government, whatever, might they also be saying, here's the money for the staff, oh, and by the way, here's the staff as well, and putting their people in place in government?
Yes, absolutely. Buy them or replace them. There's no doubt that lobbyists have and continue to play a massive part in party politics, in mainstream party politics. This is why parties like the SNP, or the smaller, what used to be smaller, driven by not being part of the mainstream. That's what's supposed to drive the SNP. That's why we should be able to resist this and should resist it, but we're not. What people need to understand, there was an excellent article in the Morning Star that pointed out it was about a quarter of MPs have received money from pro-Israel lobbyists, and this is Declassified UK did the investigation. And it's something like 180 out of 650 sitting MPs have collectively accepted more than 1.2 million in funding. And these Lloyd touched on it. You've got the Friends of the Labour Friends of Israel, the Conservative Friends of Israel, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, APAC, the Australia Israel Cultural Exchange, ELNET UK, Jewish National Fund, and the National Jewish Assembly all fund trips to Israel. Many delegations are funded by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. There's individuals like Trevor Chin, Gary Lubner are donating hundreds of thousands of pounds to 8 Labour frontbenchers, for example. Deputy Leader Angela Rayner, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, and Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting have all received funding. So this is not a surprise. What does make me fearful? It's not fearful, it's just confirming what we already knew. The leadership of the SNP are playing mainstream unionist politics. They're applying these rules, and they are playing exactly the same game for the exact same funding. And that's what Angus Robertson has done. He has betrayed us. Angus, you have no place in Scottish politics going forward for an independent Scotland. We need rid of Angus Robertson. We need rid of clowns like this idiot. I mean, it just makes you angry when you see the betrayal's really hard to take. It's really difficult to take. But when you get idiots like John Mason, I mean, how the hell he survived? As Lloyd said, he just flew under the radar for very long. But now that he's come out from under his rock and we can see him for what he is, there should be no hiding place for the likes of him, Angus, and any of the rest of their ilk that work in collude. John Swinney, Nicola. We'll do that list again. They've all got to go. It's a disgrace.
Well, you say he keeps under the radar and is quiet. Well, with a name like Mason, he knows how to keep a secret and keep quiet. Boom, boom. Thank you. You get jokes now in here, folks. Maybe rotten jokes, but you get them as well. Here's, I don't want to start a conspiracy theory, Steve. However, I'm going to start a conspiracy theory. We know the SNP skint. We know that there's 633k went missing. Police Scotland can't find anything else. We know that they've lost their short money from Westminster, their handout. Well, who could help them out? Am I just being ridiculous? But could it be, if you want some money, we can help you out? Tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, whatever it is.
I would find it difficult to conceive that that would be a reason, Roddy, being honest. For the SNP to be publicly seen to be accepting large sums of money from the Israeli state or its emissaries would be electoral suicide. I don't believe that would be the case. I think it's more to do with the fact that Israel, I think Lloyd touched on this, the constitutional threat to the United Kingdom is one, and I use the word threat in terms of how that's perceived by the United States, for example, and Israel. They do not want to lose a key ally, as they would have it, such as the United Kingdom, because don't forget, if Scotland becomes, or when Scotland becomes, hopefully, an independent country, then the United Kingdom is finished as an entity. I mean, there's been an awful lot of people inside the SNP skirting around this issue, trying to dress it up as some kind of like warm, almost kind of cuddly dissolution. But at the end of the day, that's not how it's seen by our adversaries. And that's why, they interfered in the 2014 referendum to such an extent. But Obama, remember, came across to us to preach that it would be wrong to lose a vital partner such as the United Kingdom, or words to that effect. So by extension, Israel's in that bracket. And so we've got to understand that there's a direct conflict between the democratic wishes of the people of Scotland, and the SNP forgets this, because there's still, I believe, a majority for independence amongst the populace at large. So you've got this conflict between what the people want, given the chance, and the ruthless adversaries in Westminster and elsewhere. They will go to any lengths to stop this movement being successful. And we've got to remember that, because at the end of the day, if the United Kingdom is over, then its status in the world is diminished, its reach is diminished. Questions will be asked, how could you possibly allow Scotland to be lost to the United Kingdom? So there's a lot at stake for these people. And a lot of people at the top of the SNP don't realise this, that we should be in the vanguard of the giving proper voice to the democratic will and the sovereign will of the people of Scotland. And we have not heard that often enough from the people at the top of my party. And we need to start hearing it again, because that's our raison d'etre. I mean, it's of such fundamental importance to understand the scale of the forces opposed to you. You don't have to broadcast it, but you have to be aware of it. And I don't think the party is at the top levels, because you don't sit down and parley with these people until you're in a position of strength. And the only strength this country has is it rests with the people at large. And we've got to understand that. One last point. I mean, about the whole influence of Israel and Starmer and so on. When Starmer comes out and says he sold his soul a long, long time ago, he's one of the most amoral people I've ever had the misfortune to watch. When Starmer came out and said on live on TV that Israel has the right to withhold food and water from a peaceful civilian population, he was effectively advocating genocide. So any hope that you've got that Starmer will in any way reconcile himself to, he eventually was forced to come out and back a ceasefire after months of slaughter. But there's no chance Starmer's ever going to properly call Israel to account. And that's why, as you mentioned, Roddy, the malevolent influence of Labour Friends for Israel and the Jewish Fund and so on in British politics is something that's got to be removed. Foreign funding through the agencies of a foreign state should be banned in British politics. End of. Otherwise, you become compromised and you become beholden to that foreign state. I mean, can you imagine if Kazakhstan or Bulgaria was funding to the tune of hundreds of thousands of pounds every year our members of parliament? There'll be uproar or bewilderment, but somehow, because it's Israel, it's somehow acceptable. It's not acceptable.
No, I agree.
Brought to an end forthwith.
You can imagine if Russia suddenly gave the SNP, the Scottish National Party, a big, huge donation. You can imagine the outcry. The B-52 bombers would be over quickly. Eva, do you agree that this allowing money to come from any foreign government is just wrong? I mean, we see how it's ruined America. America is run, I mean, apparently in America, every senator, every congressman or woman has a man from or woman from APEC. They're telling them what to do. It's corrupted America beyond salvation. It's wrong in the UK. It has to be stopped.
Of course it does, but what we need to look at quite properly, as the others have said, is we need to have a Scottish solution for Scottish problems, and we have to understand the importance of Scotland in the wider world, as others have said. We obviously have weapons of mass destruction on the Clyde. We have foreign troops in our country. We know that Prestwick Airport is used for all the wrong purposes. In essence, Scotland has enabled some of the worst atrocities that have occurred within the Middle East and also in the Ukraine-Russia war. I mean, earlier on, before we started recording, I had Sky News on, and there was a Ukrainian woman being interviewed, and she was talking in terms of the British tanks that are available to the Ukrainians. And she was asked by the interviewer, what else was it that the people of Ukraine need from the United Kingdom? And in effect, she said, more surface-to-air missiles, please. That's what's been broadcast on a Sunday morning throughout the United Kingdom, is a plea from Ukraine for more British money and more British weapons. There is something very far wrong here in terms of the wider world and Scotland's part in it as part of the United Kingdom. We saw, remember a few months ago, some of us were enraged that Stuart MacDonald and Alan Smith and Dave Duggan were in Ukraine giving press conferences, sitting behind a series of Union flags, Union jacks. And it's this sort of malign influence that's no good for Scotland or the Scottish independence movement, because all of that sort of influence brings with it concerns about where is the money? Where is the money coming from? Where is it going to? Why are people representing certain interests? Why are they talking positively about things that the people of Scotland in the main don't like? You know, you saw it, for example, very starkly with gender ideology and the gender recognition reform legislation when it became apparent. I think it was the Liberal Democrats it was probably known about first, the vast sums of money that they were getting from Big Pharma to promote puberty blockers and the like. So nobody is immune from this. Foreign money, money from big investors has no place in a democratic society, because all it does is buys power and influence, when the people with the power and the influence are supposed to be the electorate, who are supposed to be able to elect the people that they choose, who are then required to do their bidding, which is what, unfortunately, the SNP Scottish Government has signally failed to do over and over again, particularly in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should be. It would open a can of worms, and it's maybe a programme we should do separately. It should be state-funded, all elections and politicking. And there should be no donations allowed in, no foreign donations, no, as you say, big business donations, only grassroots stuff. But it's a long way off, a long way off. But here's another one, Lloyd. The foreign minister of Israel, the defence or foreign minister, I can't remember. Stick it up, Techie. Israel's foreign minister, told the British and French that he expects them to join in any war against Iran after they've done everything they can to get Iran to attack them and cause a war. They expect us then to send our young men and women to die for Israel. A right decision, a wrong decision, a moral decision?
I thought the sentence was going to finish off with, we expect you to come and help us fight Iran, or we'll show the world Jeffrey Epstein's diary and client list. It's a shocking situation where the arrogance and the malevolence of Israel makes it feel it has the right, through the voices of its ministers, to effectively give orders to other countries in the world. But then again, for the past 10 months, they've been carrying out a vicious and vile campaign against the Palestinians in Gaza. They've been massacring people, and the West has said next to nothing. I get the sense of Israel at the moment that they believe they are entirely and completely untouchable. But also, I find the mentality of a government that believes that war is the only solution to any given problem. But then again, when you realise it's Israel you're thinking and talking about, then that's exactly how it was created, and how it has, effectively the creation of Israel and the maintenance of Israel has resulted in 80 years of war and conflict in the Middle East. Since the day and hour that Israel was created, there has been no peace in that area. I also find it extraordinary that the Israelis seem to genuinely just expect that the West will come to their aid. Again, why wouldn't they? That's what's been happening. But what I find really, really disturbing about this is, underneath Israel's claim to or call for support from the West in its potential war against Iran, there's a deep-seated racism to this. Israel always appeals to the white countries. It's always the white countries, the post-imperial countries, the colonizer countries that Israel appeals to, and has a general negative attitude towards anyone whose skin isn't blushing white. I find that it's for a bunch of people who have such a high standard of living, who have an exceedingly good education system, the Israelis strike me as being some of the blindest and stupidest people on the planet. And it's a blindness and a stupidity created out of their own personal mythology about themselves, their past and their future. And we have no place in that. There is no reason whatsoever that any Western country, or particularly the United Kingdom, should go to war on behalf of Israel. And I think if you were to ask anyone in the street, with the possible exception of John Mason, John Swinney and Angus Robertson, they would say exactly the same thing.
You talk about there's not been any peace since it was formed. You're absolutely right. But it's not in the US's interest for there to be peace in that area, because it's always about follow the money. And if all the Arab countries come together and form their own currency and start determining who gets oil at what price, that's not in America's interest. And so it's in America's interest that there is constant strife, that Shia hates Sunni, that they all fight with each other, hate each other. Am I right, Phil?
Sadly, yes, and we're seeing changes, and I know we've touched on this and have had a few programs. It's a subject that we're all interested in, and that would be what's happening with the BRICS organization and the deconstruction of the petrodollar, and the fact
Yeah.
that Saudi cut a deal, obviously way back in the day, that they get protection from the States if they buy their oil, sell their oil, and buy trade in dollars. That is changing. Saudis now will sell to anyone in any currency, pretty much, including rupees, etc. So yeah, this hegemony is all but done, and the West is desperately trying to hang on to it, and desperate needs, desperate times, desperate actions. So people don't matter when it comes down to money for the corporations and for too many of those bought politicians. That's the tragedy here. Our politicians and our institutions are bought. There's very, very few will. Look how difficult, look what had to happen, even for some of these institutions to even mention the word genocide or to admit what's actually happening in Gaza. Look how hard, how long this has been going on, and look at these institutions that turn a blind eye to it. And our leaders are telling us to turn a blind eye to this and go and support the oppressor here. I mean, I've had IDF friends Israeli friends who went back when there was an invasion into their territory at Gaza, and they defended their villages, and I welcomed them when they came back. But I know that while some of them are still very, very torn with the whole thing. They want to protect themselves, but many people Israelis I know do not back what their government is doing just now, and Israel itself is in conflict over this. Let's see what happens, but one thing we have to do is speak up for the truth. Our politicians won't do it, our institutions won't do it. What do we have to do? We have to become, it goes back to the same thing. We need to make sure we get true representation of the people. Our government represents us, and we get the hell out of the United Kingdom as quickly as possible. Lloyd touched on it earlier. The North Atlantic Gap is strategically critical for NATO and the West, particularly as the ice recedes. The listening stations, I think there's 5 in Scotland, that track and trace trajectory of ballistic missiles and the missiles coming from southern Russia and the countries affiliated with them, and they would fly straight across Scotland if they were heading to the east coast of the United States, and that's why Scotland has to be part of NATO's construct. And I for one, I would be backing. I would be backing a Scotland, certainly not going into the EU in its current form, even though I'm a big supporter of Europeanism and the European dream. It needs, like the SNP, a clear out, and it needs to the checks and balances. And I think the people of Europe are waking up to it, as the people of Scotland are gradually waking up to it, as the people of America and Russia and all over the world, people are beginning to wake up to the fact that their governments don't represent them, and they're taking them down roads that we do not want to go down. We do not want war. The people we don't hate everybody else. Ignorance is our biggest enemy. And what we need to do is talk to people, show them alternatives. It's hard to persuade someone, was it? I can't remember if it was Twain that said, it's really hard to change someone's mind. They would rather continue in ignorance than admit they were fooled or duped. And that's the tragedy here. We've been duped and fooled and lied to so long. People tell us they don't believe what's in the newspapers, and yet they constantly spout headlines from newspapers and TV. It's a struggle. We continue to fight, and we continue to speak the truth, and we shouldn't be afraid of it.
Guys, my favourite phrase, the clock's beating us. I've still got a few topics I want to cover. And so we make our replies maybe shorter, but there's so many things that I want to go on. Not content with all the stuff with Israel, Steve, the SNP went another belter with Humza, who's decided to sue the richest man in the world for referring to him as a racist and said, I am no racist. Techie, can you stick up that video of Humza, please? Making a wee speech in Holyrood.
The Lord Justice Clerk, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white. The Chief Constable, white. Every Deputy Chief Constable, white. Every Assistant Chief Constable, white. The Head of the Law Society, white. The Head of the Faculty of Advocates, white. Every Prison Governor, white. And not just Justice. The Chief Medical Officer, white. The Chief Nursing Officer, white. The Chief Veterinary Officer, white. The Chief Social Work Advisor, white. Almost every trade union in this country headed by people who are white. In the Scottish Government, every Director General is white. Every chair of every public body is white.
Not racist at all. What he didn't mention, of course, was that the head of the Rape Crisis Centre in Edinburgh was brown. But maybe there was a reason he didn't mention that one. But he's suing Elon Musk, which I don't know if it's brave or insanity, because legal fees are not going to be a problem to Elon. Quite bizarre. It's one of those ones you should let slide, don't you think, Steve?
I reckon so, Roddy. I mean, I've got a view in this, which I don't know if anybody's going to agree with me or not, but to me, there's a kind of attempt to build a kind of ersatz international presence for Scotland through whichever means. And I think this is part of it. I think Humza probably has calculated that this kind of publicity won't do many harm. It'll project Scotland's image abroad. It'll depict Elon Musk as some kind of racist guy. But he does, in a way, court, if you like, publicity over issues like this. And it's not the first time that perhaps he's done it. But it brings to mind, I'll be quick about this, or I know not much time. It brings to mind that Nicola Sturgeon way back in 2017 or 18, and she came on stage in the EU in Brussels and walked into the arms of Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU Commission, head of the EU Commission. And he gave out all the right messages, and everybody believed that was the start of an escape hatch for Scotland, if you like, to find a way to come to a rapprochement or an agreement with the EU to save itself from Brexit. And people read that as symbolic of what was going to happen. And of course, nothing happened. There was no plan. Scotland was ejected from the EU along with England, and nothing happened because there was nothing there. The emperor had no clothes. And this is a wee bit of a similar phenomenon in my book, whereby you get a leading Scottish politician going on to or making a worldwide stage, but there ain't nothing behind it. And I'm tired of sloganising. I'm tired of grandstanding. We need to get down to the nuts and bolts of what our people desperately need and how we go about achieving independence for our country.
Here. I couldn't agree more. As our legal eagle, Eva, suing Elon Musk, big task.
I think given that Humza and his wife not so long ago had a different fairly well publicised court action, they'd probably be well advised to park this one. There are other fish needing fried in Scotland, quite honestly. But I do at the moment have a degree of sympathy for Humza Yousaf. I would not like to be a fly in the wall the next time he sees Angus Robertson or John Mason, that's for sure. But, you know, what we need to see in Scotland and in the leaders of the SNP in particular is a bit of substance over style for a change. We need to talk about power and policies as opposed to diversionary tactics onto stuff that is, quite frankly, almost irrelevant to the day-to-day lives of the people of this country. What is important is that in the last few hours, there's been what are described as scoops from some of the UK papers in respect of attempts being made to more fully fund the Scottish office so that the Scottish office will have money to give away directly from Westminster through the Scotland Office to local authorities to target particularly areas of deprivation, high poverty, etc. And that is to claw the feet from under the Scottish Parliament and to further undermine devolution.
Yeah.
While those plans are being made, the eyes are on the wrong balls, if we put it that way. And it is well past time that we were talking about independence front and centre of every political party that supports independence, and every civic leader who supports independence should be that. Instead, the front page of the National is reminding us that failed SNP politicians are talking about the need to put independence on the agenda again. It's been off the agenda only for the leaders of the SNP. It's remained firmly on the agenda for the grassroots and for the people. And that's what's got to happen. The politicians need to reflect the will of the people. And the way to do that is what we've said for years now in PRISM. Unity in the movement, which will only come when there is good faith and integrity from those who purport to lead it.
Yeah. As I say, really time, and I'm going to just 2 more questions and then we'll call it a day, folks. But Lloyd, one I want to put to you is part of this bypassing Holyrood of about undermining devolution and about promoting the British Labour Party. Angus Sarwar, leader of the branch office leader of the third or the second smallest party in Holyrood, was invited to take the salute at the tattoo. Now, it's very symbolic. We've got a picture of Angus turning up with his tartan trews, looks ridiculous, by the way, at Edinburgh for the tattoo to take the salute. One, who invited him, and what do you make of it?
The whole thing's an absolute nonsense, you know. The invitation comes from the director of the Edinburgh military tattoo, who usually is an ex-army officer working his early retirement before taking up a job as a land manager in one of the many estates in Scotland. I think they all thought this was a really good wheeze, and it would make, you know, John Swinney would blow a gasket because he wasn't invited to take the salute. Now, who really wants to be standing in the freezing cold esplanade of the castle as loads of sweaty jocks walk by you, screaming noise all the time? I don't know why we're even talking about it, because it is one of these little insults, but they all build up to something big, which is frankly just cocking a snook directly at the people. Now, if Angus Sarwar thinks that did him any good, then he's even stupider than I thought he was. It's a nonsense. Let's move on.
Correct. Anyway, anything to the British Army doesn't work for me, I'll tell you that. Last thing, and I know it's right up your street, but this week, when all this is going on, the most important and worst, vanilla thing that's happened to the Scottish people is happening. Ofgem approved the superhighway full to take our renewables, our energy down to England at no charge, free of charge, have it. And the jobs, everything that goes with it, all goes to England. Be quiet jocks, back in your box, you're getting nothing for it.
Yeah, whereas an independent Scotland would have interconnectors and would be selling our energy all over Europe. Interconnectors are direct current superhighways for energy. You can sell it, you can move it around Europe. The technology is advanced. So you contrast this with Portugal. 54% of the energy in Portugal is renewable. It ran exclusively on renewables for 149 consecutive hours and has the cheapest energy prices in Europe. Scotland, we've got over 100% of our energy. Okay, it's the intermittent nature of much of it means you still need backup, etc. But our energy should be the cheapest in Europe. We've got more renewable energy than Portugal does, and yet our prices are some of the highest in Europe, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles. It's because as part of the national grid, as part of the UK government, we will pay what they charge us, and it's more expensive to generate power in the north of Scotland than it is in the south, with the charges imposed again by the government. It's an absolute disgrace. You're paying 3 or 4 times more than you have to for your energy, folks. Wake up. Wake up and support Scottish independence.
Yeah, just as our winter fuel payments have been taken away from our pensioners. Just last thing, just come into me. Christine Graham, a stalwart of the SNP, has made a great comment, which I think is great, saying that Robertson's gone from being a luxury to a liability. Wonderful. I think a great phrase. And I don't know, as this show goes out in a half an hour or so, if Robertson will still be in situ. He shouldn't be. He should go, and he should take Swinney and a few of the others with him. But till we see you again next week, folks, you and yours, please, please, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.